Stay hungry, stay foolish. This quote is coming from a legend who revolutionized the complete mobile industry. On October 5th, 2011, this person left this planet, but his life has been of profound value to people. The teachings from his life have an impact on the present psyche of countless number of people. People consider him as a legend. People consider him on the same class of the great Henry Ford, Thomas Alva Edison. Is considered a legend who had a vision way ahead of his time. Yes, you guessed it right, ladies and gentlemen. Today we are going to talk about the legendary Steve Jobs. Hello everyone and a very warm welcome to Evolving Consciousness. I am your host Purushottam and I am sincerely grateful and I honor your time on this video, because the fact that you clicked on this video shows that you have a genuine hunger for knowledge, you have a genuine hunger for inspiration and motivation, and I truly honor and adore that. Thank you for your time on this video, and I really would like to promise you that you will gain value out of this video. So today we are going to talk about 4 top lessons which you and me can learn from the life of this legend. And because this person needs mention, because he was a class apart from the thought process, his vision, the way he operated, the way he functioned, the way he ran Apple, and to make it into such a huge success in the world, it's worth a mention. And let's remember one very important and crucial aspect. Steve Jobs' life was filled with ups and downs. And probably not many people like the way he functioned. Now let's understand one very important aspect, that it's very easy to criticize someone, it's very easy to pull down someone, but what we need to understand is, if a person has done something of value, if a person like Mr. Steve Jobs, who created a dent in the universe, who had the potential to bend reality, if that person has accomplished certain things, certainly there has to be something which you and me can learn from. So instead of being judgmental and critical of the ways which wasn't so good in him, right, the qualities which weren't that good in him, let's focus on the goodness. Because we human beings have a natural instinct to complain and criticize a person. We always like to see the bad in a person versus the good. But we need to change the way we view reality. We need to change our perspectives. You can even see good in the bad, because the bad things and the bad situations will teach you what not to do, right? So it's all a question of perspective. It's all a question of the way you observe reality. Now let's get back to Mr. Steve Jobs. Recently, a couple of months back, I bought the iPhone 14 Pro Max, which is probably the highest version of the available iPhones. And every time I look at my phone, and I'm recording this video in the same phone, every time I look at my phone, I feel in deep awe of this legend, because this person is responsible for where Apple is currently. He was the vision behind the phone. He was the vision behind the design and behind the hallmark of greatness, right? So today having an iPhone is considered a hallmark of standard. Now, if you want to understand his life, there have been movies which have been made, there have been books which have been written, there have been documentaries which have been created of Mr. Steve Jobs. And one thing you'll notice about this gentleman, about this legend, and he was someone who always followed his heart, right? So number one lesson we can learn from Mr. Steve Jobs' life is follow your heart. Now when we talk about follow your heart, right, most people misinterpret that. Follow your heart doesn't mean the kind of analogies and connotations which has been associated in today's modern day, right? It doesn't mean about, when we talk about heart, normally people consider it as sort of instrumental to platonic love and the things which glorified in Bollywood movies. No, I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about a subtle dimension. When you say follow your heart, it means follow your passions. Follow the things which excite you, which fill your soul with a sense of solace, which fill your soul with a sense of enthusiasm and also with a sense of fulfillment. Now, Steve Jobs, as you probably would be knowing, dropped out of Leeds University, right, when he was pursuing his higher education. And back then, he was absolutely goalless in life. He didn't have any big plans. I mean, he didn't really envision what he has to do in the next couple of years, but he followed his heart. And instead of going and attending the conventional classes in the Reed University, he instead took calligraphy classes, right? And he, one of his speeches in Stanford, which is the very famous Stanford speech in 2005, he did say that back then I had absolutely no clue that what this calligraphy, learning calligraphy, how is it going to add value into my career, because I was doing something very different back then, right? After 10 years, it so happens that Mr. Steve Jobs' calligraphic skills gets implemented in the design of Macintosh. So if you research a bit, you will know that the very beginnings of Macintosh, right, the feature wherein we could type things, right, the design of that was heavily influenced by Steve Jobs' calligraphic art. So he said, and he conveyed this message to the students of Stanford University, that oftentimes in life we don't understand, we find things, probably we are pursuing our passions which don't really have a direct impact in our career, don't really have a direct monetary influence or impact in our career. But if you be true to your heart, follow your heart, and be really true to yourself, then sooner or later there may come a point in life where you can connect the dots, the seemingly insignificant things which are not making any logical sense to you right now at this moment. Everything starts making sense. So don't ever forget following your heart, no matter what you want to do, right? And when you follow your heart, when you really understand what your true passion is, certainly it's going to serve you sooner or later. It's only a question of time. So he heavily focused on following your heart and doing things which you genuinely love, doing things which you genuinely are filled with a sense of enthusiasm. He really honored and valued enthusiastic people versus lethargic people. Because let's remember, if you are not someone who is enthusiastic about what he's doing, you will not create anything of substance, you will not create anything of value. So Steve always focused on this quality of enthusiasm. Always he sort of adored the employees who exhibited this hallmark quality of enthusiasm. And he said, it doesn't matter to me what is the level of proficiency of a particular employee. So whenever he interviewed employees to sort of get in Apple so that he could sort of incubate them into Apple, he would obviously expect a certain level of proficiency and skill sets, but the number one deciding factor which sort of decides whether this employee is a good fit to Apple or not would be the fact that whether this person is in love with Apple, with the idea of Apple. If the answer is yes, then the employee is a good fit. If he is only someone who is in love with the salary or is in love with the job, then probably he is not a good fit for him. But if he is someone who really loves my company, who loves Apple as a brand, he probably will not he will bring value to that company, right? And he won't just breeze around and won't just fool around in the company. He'll bring something to the table. That was his mindset. He always valued people who followed their passion. So that is the number one lesson which we can learn from Mr. Steve Jobs. Now, coming to lesson number 2, which we all can learn from Mr. Steve Jobs, right? He always used to say something very beautiful, and he said that failure, right, is probably the number one opportunity for your growth. Now, this is a very known concept in self-help groups, and whenever you go through self-help literature, people normally consider failure as an opportunity, failure as a vehicle of growth, and it seems philosophy, right? And it gives you a certain sense of solace when you're going through a downtime. But it is not just a philosophy, it is a fact. Failure necessarily need not equate to defeat. Let's understand the subtle difference between failure and defeat. Failure is what happens to you from the outside, and that outside circumstances didn't go the way you wanted them to go, and as a consequence of that, you failed in that particular dimension or aspect. But defeat is when you accept the fear and you are not willing to get up. When you come under this victim mindset, when you let that victim mindset dictate your thoughts, beliefs, and actions, right? And you consider your failure as your reality, which is going to stay with you forever, that's defeat. You can either take failure as a catastrophe or you can take failure as a vehicle of growth. Now let's see how Steve Jobs did this. As you probably know, in the year 1985, Steve Jobs was very humiliated, and he was fired from Apple, right? And to add to this sort of humiliation, John Scully, who was the person who Steve Jobs himself hired from Pepsi, he was the person who was instrumental in sort of making Steve Jobs lose his job in Apple. Just imagine the kind of pain Mr. Steve Jobs would have gone through. The person who built the company, he is forced to leave the company. He was in a way kicked out of the company. And in the Stanford speech, Mr. Steve Jobs says that today when I reflect on that failure, he says that's the best thing which ever happened to him. If he reflects back, if he contemplates back on his life, he realizes that's probably the best thing which ever happened to him. Because hadn't that happened, he said that it almost felt that I was already in the peak of my success, and now suddenly failure had brought me to the stage of a beginner. The heaviness of success was completely removed out of me, and now I felt the lightness of a beginner. And he told that the years when he was away from Apple were the most creative years of his life. He built 2 more successful companies, Pixar and the Next. After a couple of years, Mr. Steve Jobs was called back to Apple because Apple was completely making huge losses, right? It was completely in a zone where it was going to be shut down, and Steve Jobs was called back. This is how legends use humiliation and failure as a stepping stone for them. If there was someone else other than Steve Jobs, right, then probably he would have gone in a state of acute depression, acute melancholy and lamentation. But look at Mr. Jobs. He instead came back with a bang, and he not only re-evolutionized Apple, he brought Apple to where it is now, right? So it is very important. Now this is not only with Steve Jobs. My earlier video on Mr. Ratan Tata is also an exemplary example of how legends use failures and vehicles of growth. So this is not philosophy, right? This is the way the legends function. They have sort of exhibited these qualities through their conduct in life. Hence, whenever we meet failures, right, let's view that as an opportunity. Let's see what best I can do in this time zone, because that will serve us, and the next time we will be in a better position to handle the situation. I was going through a beautiful podcast in which the speaker was saying, in life there can only be 2 possibilities. Either you succeed or you learn. There is nothing called as a failure as said, right? So in life, either you can succeed or you can learn. Consider failures as your learnings, not as failures, right? So this is one of the most profound lessons which you and me can learn from Mr. Steve Jobs. Now the third lesson, now this is huge, and this is something which is very close to my heart as well. He said we are already naked, right? Now before you build up some preconceived notions of what I just said, let me briefly elaborate and let us dive into what he meant by that. He said that when I was at the age of 17, when Mr. Steve Jobs was around 17 years of age, he read something very insightful. He read that we all come with an expiry date and we all have a limited amount of time. So let's stop fooling around, right? Let's do things which will be meaningful. And he always said that now, when he was diagnosed with this pancreatic cancer, and he almost had a clock ticking, every second was clicking, and it was brought to his notice that he's going to die soon. That was when his mind was completely cleared of all the nonsense of the world. He said that all the insecurities, all the fear of humiliation, all the fear of failure completely left me once death visited me. Because when death visits you, right, everything which is non-significant, everything which doesn't add value to you, you completely are shut down. Now, fear of failure, fear of humiliation, it doesn't really affect you. What really matters is what really does matter, right? What really matters is what is true to you. Because normally the way we function, the way our choices are made, it is always based on the fears. What if I don't succeed? What if that person reacts this way? What if this person reacts this way? He said that whenever I am in the midst of crossroads, when I had to choose between two different decisions, he would ask himself this very important question: if today was the last day of my life, which choice I would take? And that would make his decision making process very simple and very easy. Because most of us think that we all have a lot of time in this world. Now, this is not philosophy. Again, let's understand, this is realism. Nobody knows when a person is going to die, right? So nobody comes with a sort of a age group that anybody can lose his life any moment. Now, most people might view this as pessimism or a negative way, but no, it's not. It's probably death is the most potent way of destroying all fears, because the very root of fears, right, is death. And if you are striking on that very root, then no other fear will ever be able to sort of confine your consciousness. Because sooner or later you're going to die, so you'll do something of value instead of confining yourself because of the fear of dogmas. He always said something very important and noteworthy, that most people are conditioned to society, to dogmas, to their thought processes of what the world thinks is right? And Steve Jobs was completely against that. He said, always listen to your inner voice. Always be true to your ideals, to your personal authenticity. Because the world is always going to try to make you something else. Right? Ralph Waldo Emerson put it so beautifully. He said, in a world which is trying to make you someone else, to be yourself is a hallmark quality of greatness. Hence, it's very important for each one of us to harbor this deathbed mentality, because once we start having this deathbed mentality, right, we will start questioning things and ask ourselves this very important questions as to what are the things which really matter to me and what are the things which probably don't matter to me as much. And it will give us immense clarity as to how to take our day-to-day choices. So this is the number 3rd lesson from Mr. Steve Jobs. Now, Mr. Steve Jobs had this unique persona about himself, that he valued perfection beyond anything else. And he always had this kind of thought process that when we need to be hungry, right? His famous quote, which I started this video with, stay hungry, stay foolish. He always had this learning mindset. He always had a hunger for knowledge. He always had this bent of mind where he could think, what could be my next move? How could I innovate better? How could I serve my customers better? And when this thought process, when his team was telling him that you should probably think of focused products, right? So that he caters to a focused set of audience. Steve Jobs completely rejected that idea, and he quoted Henry Ford. Henry said that my customers probably don't know what they need until I show them. Henry Ford had told that if I go and ask my customers what they need, they probably will ask me a horse, right? So it is important that instead of asking people what they want, show them what they want, and they will know, they'll be in a better position to decide if what you're showing them makes them want that particular thing or not. So Steve Jobs had this kind of a mindset. When his team was telling him to do a market research, he completely said, no, I won't do a market research. I want to give them different products, and then they will come to know what they can take from it. Now this is a very hallmark quality of entrepreneur, right? Entrepreneur. Now Steve Jobs is probably one of the most inspiring entrepreneurs for everyone to gain inspiration from. Hope this video made sense to you. Let me do a quick recap. Number 1 was follow your heart. Number 2 was to view failures as opportunities. Number 3 was to understand and cultivate a deathbed mentality and come to a consensus with yourself that what truly matters, right? And number 4 was to staying hungry. And also when he said stay foolish, he really meant that shouldn't stop ourselves from taking bold moves, from taking the necessary risks. Because if you are going to play like not a very visionary and not a very go forward leader, you are probably not going to take huge risks. And if you are not going to take huge risks, you are going to be in the same zone which you were earlier, right? So he always encouraged taking bold moves, and he always encouraged staying hungry. Now there are so many different things which you and me can learn from Mr. Steve Jobs, but I thought these 4 aspects of Mr. Steve Jobs are his hallmark traits, are his hallmark lessons from what we can learn from this gentleman. Hope this video added value to you. Hope this video brought about a new way of viewing and looking at reality. Hope these 4 lessons brought about a certain sense of inspiration from this legend who sort of dawned on this planet, right? Thank you so much, and if you really enjoyed this content, don't forget to like, share, and also subscribe to my channel if you really enjoyed the genre of content which I share in this particular videos, right? Which I share in this video. Thank you so much, and meet you in the next video. Bye.